Drage gledateljice i dragi gledatelji, dobar vam dan i dobrodošli u N1 Davos, emisiju u kojoj pratimo događaje vezane uz redovni godišnji susret Svjetskog ekonomskog foruma u Davosu. Ove se godine Svjetski ekonomski forum održava kao i ostatak života u pandemiji, virtualno prilagođenog naziva Davos Agenda. To naravno ne znači da nedostaje visokoprofilnih gostiju, tema pa i kontroverzi. Ostanite uz nas. Veliku pažnju svojim je izlaganjem izazvao Benjamin Netanjahu. Gotovo pa vječni, usudili bi se neki reći, premijer Izraela, otporan kao teflon na sve korupcijske afere koje se vežu za njega i to poprilično ozbiljne. Nastupio je iz pozicije predsjednika vlade države koja je možda odlučila u jednom trenutku biti pokusni kunić za cijeli svijet kada je cijepljenje protiv COVID-19 u pitanju, ali su zato dobili apsolutno sve što su trebali dobiti, barem kada je riječ o količini cjepiva, što sad pak muči Europsku uniju prije svega, odnosno sve njezine države članice, pa tako i Republiku Hrvatsku. Naravno da su to postigli vještim pregovaranjem i sada imaju cijepljen dosta značajan postotak populacije, a oni koji su već cijepljeni su uočili dosta značajne padove što se tiče samih simptoma i ostalih razloga zbog kojih se u ostalom populacija i cijepila.
Between vaccination and mutation. The mutations, especially the British mutation, but there'll be more mutations. There are more mutations. There'll be more mutations in the future. Means that we have to race as fast as we can to vaccinate first the risk groups in the population and then everyone else in order to give immunity, and then probably expect the companies that are producing the vaccines at this point to modify their vaccines to accommodate the mutations that they don't cover now as they develop. And then we'll have to purchase them. That's going to be our life for the coming years. I don't think that we're going to evade that, but we can overcome it. I think the key is two things. Most people think it's education, and it is. That is the level of education, especially higher education, is critical. And we've had that all along. But that is a necessary but insufficient condition for the emergence of a high-tech or innovative economy. I mean, the most important one, and I would even put it before education, is free markets. You cannot really innovate in closed markets. So you have to give free markets, and you have to take certain risks because some of that innovation, in our case, comes especially from the military. That's where we've had our stock of innovation, especially IT. We invest at some cost. We invest a huge amount of our national resources on and maintaining effective intelligence. Israel is a small country, but it has a giant head. Giant. I mean, I think water is going to be a huge challenge, and I think we can overcome it as many other things with technology. I mean, it's almost like, why did the great forecasts not work out on the shortage of food, and humanity's growth rate and so on? It turns out humanity did grow an exponential rate, but it turns out that food grew at a much greater rate because of technology. I mean, this is obviously the same thing can happen with water. It did happen in water in the case of Israel. I mean, we have a little less rainfall than we had at the founding of the state 73 years ago. Our population has grown tenfold. Our GDP and GDP per capita has multiplied. So we should have water scarcity. We should have water wars, and we have neither. What we have is we just make our water, or we save our water. We recycle about 90% of water, which is first in the world, and the next one, runner-up, is Spain with about 20%, I think. So we recycling technology, key. Production technology of new water, key. We have, I think, the world's largest, one of the largest, perhaps the leading something you have in the Emirates as well. Distillation, desalinization plants along the Mediterranean, and we're using solar technology. We intend to be a world leader, the world leader in 10 years in producing solar energy, and so we can desalinate water without using without unnecessary pollution.
Ostajemo u bliskoistočnoj regiji. Neke države, pored svih problema s kojima se susreće većina svijeta, pogotovo kada je riječ o COVID-19, imaju i svoj specifičan set problema. Jedna od tih država je Jordan, koja je zapravo u svoju državu primila kroz niz desetljeća brojne izbjeglice iz Palestina, odnosno iz područja Izraela i Palestine. Dapače do te mjere da danas broje najveći broj izbjeglica u odnosu na broj stvarnih stanovnika domicilne te države, što pak za sobom povlači čitav niz drugih problema koje je adresirao jordanski kralj Abdullah II ibn al-Husein, odnosno kralj Husein.
The pandemic continues to ravage our world, and we have barely scratched the surface of its long-term humanitarian and economic implications. Yet I believe there is a glimmer of hope. Some vaccines are ready, and as we start this long overdue healing process, we are better served trying to heal this together. And here we must ensure the efficient and equitable distribution of COVID vaccines as well as treatments. It is a moral duty to treat the vaccine as a global public good that ensures that low-income and poor countries are not left at the end of the waiting line as high-income countries buy the majority of the most promising vaccines. Amidst these challenging times, safeguarding the health and well-being of refugees remains a global responsibility. And as Professor Schwab said, as the second highest number of refugees per capita globally, Jordan continues to protect refugees in its pandemic response. And we are among the first countries in the world to start vaccinating refugees for free. But international support is also essential. We must collectively work to develop new policy tools to help us address the problems of today and tomorrow.
No, pored COVID-19, pored pandemije, pored onih promjena koje se očekuju ili priželjkuju u sustavu globalnog kapitalizma, možda i najvažnija tema koja dominira već godinama Svjetskim ekonomskim forumom u Davosu su klimatske promjene. Klimatske promjene koje različito djeluju na različite države svijeta, naravno ovisno prije svega o njihovom položaju i ovisno o njihovoj specifičnosti, klimatskoj specifičnosti. Sve to naravno u mnogome utječe i na politike tih država koje poručuju, odnosno ljudi iz njih poručuju, jedino zajedno na razini globalne zajednice možemo se boriti protiv klimatskih promjena.
I think really we're singing from the same song sheet right now. Everything that you've said resonates with us. And I think more particularly the action that one needs to take now, get to the right side of history. And I think three very quick points. First, that COP really matters. And this is a pivotal year for making that action happen in COP. On the net zero, broadening that coalition. Right now, we've got a good 65% of emitters and 70% of the world economy, but we need to get it all. Second, I would say the 100 billion. The 100 billion needs to have a really serious handshake. It's not going to get us the climate action to where we want to be, but it is the handshake that gives people the trust across that bridge for all of us to do the things that we need to do. And it is a public-private sector discussion. Article 6 and, of course, the NDCs with their increased ambition. And so we look forward to seeing the states with their enhanced NDC. On the COVID response, right now the COVID response is an opportunity, not an excuse for failure. And so really important that the global response on the finance side and on the vaccine. Vaccines will open up the economy, but more importantly, how we find the liquidity and the fiscal gaps filled by a global response on finance. And that's really a G7, G20 issue that needs to happen now so that we can encourage that leapfrogging into a green transition, creating the jobs and making sure that those those energy transitions become a reality and not just an aspiration. The third thing I would say is that, business, investors, oil and gas, and we have them all on this panel, there are huge expectations from supply chains to decarbonization to ensuring that everyone is committing to transparency and net zero. And I think here, the voice and the actions around what the states do is going to open up that space, and it'll then be a race to the top. And I think that that's what we need. Missing in the last 4 years has allowed people to sort of slip and slide, and now we're galvanizing and getting us over. So that global, local handshake, really important. And maybe, to hear a little bit more about what we're saying about the role of young people in leadership, and the cabinet that President Biden has put forward is fantastic to see women there, but really young people at the helm of affairs, in the decision making, in the actions that need to be taken. So really look forward to this journey.
Amina Mohamed možda priželjkuje mlade ljude u Bidenovoj administraciji koji bi se bavili klimatskim promjenama. Međutim, Joe Biden se odlučio na kontinuitet i na neka poznata lica poput Johna Kerrya, nekadašnjeg predsjedničkog kandidata, nekadašnjeg ministra vanjskih poslova, odnosno državnog tajnika, prvog američkog koji je posjetio Kubu nakon 1945. godine. Upravo John Kerry je posebni predsjednički izaslanik pri UN-u upravo kako bi se borio, odnosno doprinio borbi protiv klimatskih promjena.
So domestic action cannot possibly be enough if we don't together forge an international strategy to galvanize the world, to drive greater ambition from every country, every sector, and ensure that the clean energy future we need is global in scope and scale. The whole world has to come to this table to solve the problem. So we rejoin the international climate effort with humility, and I mean that, and ambition. Humility because we know we've wasted 4 years in which we were inexcusably absent. Humility knowing that today almost no country, and for certain no continent, is getting the job done. But we re-enter with ambition, knowing that at the COP in Glasgow in November, all nations have to raise our sights together, or we all fail together. Our goal in Glasgow is to see all major emitting countries together raise ambition, to not be content with goals 30 years from now, but to lay out roadmaps with benchmarks starting this year to acknowledge gaps where they exist, but to show how we get there. Because we need technology breakthroughs, and critically, we need to put forward real finance plans to bring the whole world along. Failure is obviously not an option. And that's why ambition is so important, because success will actually bring enormous reward in countless measures. We have to get away from this argument that deniers and procrastinators have made that this is a choice between a quality of life or taking care of this challenge. Success means tapping into the best of global ingenuity, creativity, and diplomacy, from brain power to alternative energy power, using every tool we have to get where we need to go. A zero emissions future offers remarkable opportunity for business, for clean, green jobs, for economic growth, and to use the president's words, to build back better from the global economic crisis. Just a few quick examples to demonstrate what this opportunity really is. The highest valued auto company in the world today is Tesla, and it only makes electric vehicles. Mitsubishi is building the world's largest zero-emission steel plant in Austria. Heidelberg Cement is working on a plant in Norway that anticipates capturing all of its CO2 from concrete by 2030. Globally, the cheapest new electric power plant you can install is based on renewables, which explains why it now makes up more than 70% of all new capacity. And green economies are going to generate a remarkable number of new jobs. The EU anticipates 2 million of different jobs. Here in the US, until COVID, we had 5 years of steady growth in clean energy employment, with over 3.3 million workers put into jobs across our country. India has seen a 5-fold increase in clean energy jobs over the same period. And that's just a taste of the marketplace without limits that awaits us if we get serious. The bottom line, my friends, is I don't think anybody can say, I mean, individual countries have been serious, individual companies have been serious, but as a world, we have yet to be really serious and do what we need to do. And according to most of the recent statistics, emissions globally rose over the years since Paris. And while 2020 obviously saw a small dip because of COVID, they are now again on the rise, and everybody expects a quick rebound unless much more stringent policies are put into place. To be on track and accomplish this, even with a 66% probability of keeping global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees, we need to cut global emissions in half by 2030. What does that mean? It means we have to phase out coal 5 times faster than we have been. It means we have to increase tree cover 5 times faster. It means we have to ramp up renewable energy 6 times faster. It means we have to transition to electric vehicles at a rate 22 times faster. All of that is achievable if we plan, if we invest, and if we tap the forces of the marketplace. Can we do it? We actually can, but not unless we summon greater political will, not unless we harness the full energy of the marketplace, not unless we ask the private sector to help our financial institutions mobilize essential trillions in the innovation and the finance that we need.
Ostaćemo naravno u temi klimatskih promjena, temi koja, kao što sam već rekao, dominira ovogodišnjim i ne samo ovogodišnjim Davosom, a sada odlazimo na kratki predah. Ostanite uz nas. Ostajemo, kao što smo i rekli, u temi klimatskih promjena. Dobrodošli nazad u N1 Davos. Klimatske promjene, odnosno suzbijanje negativnih, katastrofalnih posljedica klimatskih promjena, posljedica koje osjeća cijela zemaljska kugla, nije samo stvar društva, politike, nego i ekonomije i ekonomskih modela. Evo što je o tome rekao Mark Carney.
What is the role of offsets in the context of a 1.5 degree climate ambition?
Well, thank you, Nicole, and let me compliment the leaders of this task force. It's a remarkable achievement. First thing to say is that this carbon budget is very precious. On business as usual, so pre-pandemic emissions, we have less than a decade of a carbon budget to remain within 1.5 degree temperature increases. So it is a limited carbon budget. Context, really a voluntary carbon offset market does 4 things. The first, it's complementary, I underscore that, complementary to companies' efforts to reduce absolute emissions. Companies' responsibility, first and foremost, is to reduce their absolute emissions, and as the report says, they need to first reduce, then report, including net zero plans, and I'm sure we'll get into the specifics of that, and then, only then, look to offset. The second thing that this does is it is catalytic. It's catalytic not for renewable projects in many advanced economies where the economics are absolutely clear, they are profitable and they will be driven, but they're catalytic for projects that many of which are in emerging and developing economies where the economics are not yet quite there. And this can help tip the balance for those projects to come in. They also, these offsets can also be catalytic as part of helping the economics of absolutely essential breakthrough technologies that need to happen for us to ultimately get to net zero. And I'm sure that will come up more clearly because Bill Gates has led on those technologies. The third thing is this market is cross-border. This market is being driven, it's a voluntary market, but it's being driven by companies making these net zero commitments. Most of those companies, the vast majority of those companies are in the G7 advanced economies, so-called advanced economies. They will be looking for high quality, high integrity offsets. And most of those offsets will come from emerging and developing economies. So this is a potentially huge cross-border flow. And then the last thing, and I'll hand back to you, Nicole, is that this market has the potential, again, properly structured, to have enormous co-benefits. Co-benefits for biodiversity, co-benefits for other SDGs, although rooted in a high integrity, highly credible, open, transparent carbon offset market.
A o pauzama od stavljanja čipova u cjepiva protiv COVID-19 Bill Gates neumorno radi na nekim drugim modelima vladanja svijetom, a to je naravno kako prodati priču o klimatskim promjenama kako bi zapravo vladao nama. Naravno, šalimo se, ovo su teme koje nažalost prečesto nalaze prelako svoj put do mainstreama, do društvenog mainstreama. Bill Gates ni ove godine nije zaboravio na svoju filantropsku ulogu koju često pokazuje upravo u Davosu, a zaista je snažno angažiran upravo oko sprečavanja posljedica klimatskih promjena.
And we know that nature-based solutions are going to be a critical part of the solution to achieving net zero. But what else is needed?
Well, I'd say the good news is that a lot of companies are taking carbon into account as they make decisions. They have, some per ton hurdle price, and they, are going to stay away from investments that, are generating carbon because of that price signal. The big step, the next step there is getting people to monetize those things and put that money into things that are provably have an impact. And a number of companies now are willing to do that. Now, some of these offsets are very complicated. Trees, for example, have a 40-year lifetime on average. So to match the carbon residency time, you'd have to replant 250 times. And trees generally grow where there's good soil and good water. And so the number of places where you can do those 250 plantings is very, very small. So, over time, the understanding and the quality of these efforts will go up. As I went to do offsets for myself personally, long-term offsets, the prices were about $400 a ton. That's very, very high. And everything we think of here, it's 51 billion tons of emissions. And so everything has to be considered as a percentage of that. For a company that's a electric utility, a steel company, a cement company, any sort of industrial thing, you see the increase in price that they'd have to have is still significant. So innovation is going to be key to this as we do the carbon markets in parallel with funding the innovation activities.
How do you see the role of private sector climate commitments to drive the scaling up of voluntary carbon markets? And what is the risk of getting this wrong?
Well, I think the way forward here is to connect these private sector payments to innovation. If you just have, some wealthy companies that aren't in the industrial sectors where the extra green cost would make their products non-competitive, if they're just dealing with their portion, it's a very small percentage. On the other hand, if you're taking this offset money and you're bootstrapping the markets for the difficult products like green cement, green steel, green aviation fuel, then you can start the learning curve. And as you get that volume and learning curve, then these premiums can come down. Because after all, to be at zero by 2050, all the products that middle income countries buy for shelter and lighting and transport, are going to have to come at such a small premium that they're willing to shift all their purchasing. And so taking the lesson from solar energy, where country policies drove up those volumes and the prices came down, and now shifting that to the hard areas, including industrial and things like green hydrogen, if we can take this money and start those learning curves. And so we're driving up the volume and causing success and more innovation to get those premiums down. Then I see these voluntary carbon markets and the acceleration of innovation through the marketplace as really coming together and giving us that chance of getting to zero.
Kao što smo rekli, dakle, tema koja dominira Davosom ne samo ove godine je klimatske promjene, odnosno posljedice klimatskih promjena. Međutim, ništa manje u fokusu, paralelno s ovom pokušava se razgovarati o četvrtoj industrijskoj revoluciji koja je već u debelom zamahu i koja u potpunosti iz temelja mijenja svijet, mijenja način na koji živimo, način na koji radimo, dovodi naravno do gubitka radnih mjesta, ali i do otvaranja novih. U svemu tome značajnu ulogu igraju države i upravo u toj četvrtoj industrijskoj revoluciji priliku vide države koje su možda do sada bile, globalno govoreći, na repu događanja, a sada preuzimaju glavnu palicu u svoje ruke.
We have to follow the trend of this fourth industrial revolution. We have to seize on the tendency of informatization, digitalization, etc. We have to explore new model, new industry, and to discover new driving force for the growth and new pathways for growth. So I think today it is of more important to remember his speech. So at our ministry, we have carried out a work in three respects. First of all, we have combined a new innovation system with intellectuals, researchers, and industries. We are trying to transform the industry, the technology into a reality. We are building a more conducive and transparent innovation environment. Secondly, we are trying to boost the new technology sectors. We're doing breakthroughs in the new technologies. We are enhancing, for example, biology, new material, as well as the new energy cars, etc. Thirdly, we are doing work to integrate new technologies and manufacturing sectors.
The way we see it, it has four different levels, right? So the first level is that business models themselves are changing. We're seeing a huge amount of transformation of enterprises themselves. And the way you see this is you see data monetization happening within companies. You see as-a-service models evolving. You see companies becoming almost completely digital. And you're seeing a blurring of boundaries between companies. So I think one of the impacts of AI is the fact that business models themselves are changing quite dramatically. The second thing that we see is that there is a convergence of technologies. Cloud is obviously essential from an AI perspective. Then you've got IoT, you've got robotics. So you're seeing multiple technologies come together, and AI is just a label that we're applying things that we're seeing across the board. So you're seeing a change in industry models. You're seeing convergence of various technologies. You're seeing questions of ethics being raised in terms of data privacy, in terms of data security, in terms of questions about bias. And then finally, you're seeing AI being applied in the context of, in the context of changing workforce dynamics. The workforce is a lot more distributed now.
As all the revolutions, we also need to pay attention to the other side. We will have lots of benefits. However, we also need to figure out what would be the hurdle, what would be the risk, what would be the challenges. From my perspective, obviously, there will always be some challenges in terms of technology, in terms of business model, and for business opportunities. To be honest, those challenges are quite exciting because they will bring us lots of opportunity for innovation. However, from the society perspective, I would say we need to pay more attention to the people. We need to figure out what would be the impact of those innovations to to the people. Of course, post-industrial revolution, all this emerging technology will bring us great benefits, but there will also be some disruption in many industries. As a result, many jobs and lives will be affected. And I think for us, the right strategy is to make sure that all the stakeholders, government, industry, people work together to think about how to expand opportunities during this revolution and to think about how to help every people get ready for the future.
A pandemija koronavirusa otvorila je brojna pitanja, odnosno možda samo još više izložila, prokazala brojna pitanja nejednakosti u svijetu. I to je naravno jedna od tema koja se stavila ove godine na dnevni red u Davosu i ne samo ove godine, što su uostalom primijetili i neki panelisti koji su razgovarali upravo na ovu temu, poput gradonačelnika Londona.
And let me say, we're paying for the profound failure of governments to address inequality. Oxfam is at Davos, as you say, this year with new data. It shows that we risk facing the greatest rise in inequality since records began. And it could take more than a decade for billions of people to recover from the economic hit of the pandemic. While at the very top, just 10 billionaires, all men, have seen their wealth skyrocket by $500 billion since March. That could have paid to vaccinate the world and prevent anyone from being pushed into poverty by the pandemic.
What this pandemic has done is not simply expose the structural inequalities in our society. I would argue we are the most progressive city in the world. Even being so, this pandemic has exposed those structural inequalities, but it's exacerbated them as well. What do I mean by that? If you're a black male Londoner, you're 4 times more likely to have lost your life than if you're a white male Londoner. If you're a mother, you're 50% more likely to have lost your job than if you're a father. And so I've experienced what the IMF is talking about when the IMF says, if we're not careful, we could undo 30 years of progress made around gender equality. And Ishan, you'll hear phrases like build back better being used by not just the new president of the USA. I can actually smile when I say president of the USA now, rather than frown or be intimidated into cowering. But actually it means a new normal where we have a just recovery. And I hate using the word opportunity when it comes to a global pandemic, but Gabriela is spot on. We've got to use this horrible pandemic as an opportunity to reset and, in your words, reboot our economies across the globe. And that means not just government, but also civic society, the business community, the faith community, and others working together to address some of the inequalities we've talked about for too many years on an annual basis at Davos.
A na Davosu se naprosto na dnevnoj bazi događa toliko toga da ne uspijevamo uz najbolju volju i uz najveći mogući trud prenijeti sve ono što je tamo izrečeno, odnosno ono o čemu se govori, o čemu se razgovara. Još više truda sebi daju ljudi iz Davosa kako bi to saželi na minimum minimuma i evo kako to izgleda.
Hi, I'm Dr. Danielle Bainbridge, and this is the Davos Daily. With the pandemic keeping us locked indoors, the World Economic Forum have moved their annual meeting from Davos to, well, wherever you are right now. And with this virtual conference, you can tune in anytime you want. But first things first, I'm here to give you some of the most captivating highlights so far. And let's start with some good news.
There are vaccine doses in vials now, and we're hoping to have something like 145 to 150 million doses delivered in the first quarter, maybe 500 million in the second quarter, and then 1.5 billion in the second half of the year.
There are still pitfalls related to equity and access, as these comments from Cyril Ramaphosa show.
Rich countries in the world are holding on to these vaccines, and we are saying release the excess vaccines that you have ordered and hoarded. The world needs access to those vaccines.
But it's integral that wealthy countries don't just act independently, which is why I'm pleased to let you hear firsthand from some European heavyweights.
If we don't urgently act to protect our nature, the next pandemic will be around the corner. To those who prefer the business case, here it is. More than half of global GDP is dependent on high-functioning biodiversity and ecosystems. The top 5 global risks are all related to the environment.
If we're going to see success and growth in the future, we'll need to first agree on how we treat and take care of our planet.
Our societies are vulnerable because nature is reminding us of this. We are vulnerable to pandemic, climatic events, and so on. And so the economy of tomorrow, strengthened by these lessons, is going to have to be an economy that thinks about innovation and humanity. And it's going to have to build competitiveness together with the climate challenge, reducing CO2 emissions, adapting our societies, the biodiversity agenda. So it's an economy that will have to be more resilient.
And I could not share one of my favorite highlights from the session on reimagining education with Professor Angela Duckworth.
Most of us did not grow up with Google, right? Or like the internet, but like that now exists. Like, why would you want to memorize almost anything? There is a kind of Byzantine structure in education that we inherited from, the way civilization just was for a long time. And now, because knowledge has expanded exponentially and access to it has become frictionless and immediate, like, why do we still school in the same way?
As an educator myself, I agree with Professor Duckworth's points. Why are we doing school the exact same way it was done years ago when the way that students engage with the world and the ways that they learn are constantly evolving and changing? We need to be preparing students for the challenges of the future, and in order to do that, we need innovative approaches to teaching to be integrated into the classroom. That should give you a sense of what you've missed. Keep up to date with the rest right here online on YouTube.
I ovim pregledom dana smo došli do kraja pregleda dana, onoga što se događalo na Svjetskom ekonomskom forumu u Davosu. Sutra nas očekuju premijeri dviju država kamo se seli, odnosno jedne države, ali premijeri dijela svijeta kamo se seli. Ovaj put iznimno Svjetski ekonomski forum krajem svibnja. Japanski premijer i premijer Singapura, u kojem će biti Svjetski ekonomski forum umjesto u Davosu ove godine, se sutra obraćaju javnosti. Mi ćemo napraviti pregled cijelog tjedna i razgovarati sa jednim redovnim gostom Svjetskog ekonomskog foruma u Davosu, koji nam možda otkrije kako to zapravo izgleda iznutra. U svakom slučaju, budite večeras uz nas u 21 sat, odnosno sutra opet u 15 sati i 15 minuta, a sada slijedi Newsroom. Ostanite uz N1 televiziju.